Well, well, what has the cat dragged in today? It's a video tutorial about victory and defeat, but victory too. All right, so our project, as we last left it, is almost complete. Really, the only things we have left are successfully picking up the chicken and winning the game, or getting caught and losing the game. Now, in order to let the player know that they have won or lost, we're going to need some UI elements. So let's get those created real quick here. So I am going to create, no, not a 3D object. I am going to create a canvas. And because I'm working with canvas, I'm going to switch to 2D mode, double click on canvas so that I zoom out and I can see the whole canvas. Now I'm going to want two canvases here. I'm going to want one canvas for showing off victory and one for showing off defeat. Or I say canvas, actually I mean panels. I'm going to use panels for this. So I've got my main canvas here, and then I am going to create a panel. Why a panel? Because it comes pre-built in with this nice semi-transparent background. And I am going to call this Victory Panel. Now I could also do this with canvases, but I'm just going to do it with panels because it doesn't really matter too much. And now I only want this panel to take up so much of the screen. Let's say 25%. So, or I want to take up 75% of the screen. So 25% on either side. No, let's make this simple. 50% of the screen. So my mins will be 0.25. My max will be 0.75 on the anchors. And then I'm going to remove all of my offset information. This gives me a nice little square dead center in the screen that's going to display the you win or the you lost stuff. Inside of here, I'm going to add as a child component, a text component. Which I'm going to call LBL Victory. Again, as a reminder, the LBL part is just part of my personal naming convention. LBL for text that will never change, and TXT for text that will change. So I'll put in a message, you found the chicken and won. And I want this to have a reasonable font size. So I'm going to increase the size of my font box here, or my text box, by dragging on the circular widgets. If you changed your widget tool and you need to get back to the rectangular select, it's this tool right here. And let's pump this up. Say font size 50. And I think that looks pretty good. And I will center everything. So you found the chicken and won. Make sure this is in fact centered. And there we go. Not the most exciting looking thing in the world, but it does its job. Now, if you'll remember in the initial setup video, I had quit and restart buttons down here. I will cover how to implement those in the bonus details video. I'm not going to cover those right now. So there we go. You found the chicken and won. And I am going to duplicate that and rename it to the loss panel. I'm going to take the victory panel and turn it off. I am going to rename label victory to label loss. You shall never find the chicken. Let's just do 3 dots. There we go. And there we go. Now I have my UI for loss. Now I'm going to need to have some way of referencing these. I could put these on the player because that's where I plan on placing my game logic, but I don't know. It seems to me that this would make more sense as scene variables because maybe something else, if I could put some more complex logic in here, maybe something else is going to want to access these. And they're not really related to the functionality of the player specifically. So, yeah, I don't want to put them on the player. I'm going to put the references to these in the scene variables. So I'm going to come over here to scene variables as part of my setup here. And I'm going to say, lowercase v, victory UI. And this will be a game object reference. And of course, I'll drag in the victory panel. And then loss UI, which will be a game object. And I will drag in the loss panel. So that gets things set up, at least on the UI side of things. Depending on which one of these I turn on, I have either won or I have lost. So that sets up the UI side of things. Pretty gosh darn simple. Now, how are we going to handle the logic between, displaying these? Because I only want to do this once. In other words, this isn't something that's going to work well just like tacking on to an update loop in either player move or player rotate. And I definitely don't want to put this in the enemy AI because I'm going to have multiple enemies, not just the one enemy. So I don't want to have multiple enemies all trying to control turning on and off things for game logic. So that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I am going to create a game logic state machine. As you think about it, I've got 3 distinct states. I have game playing, I have victory, and I have loss. And I have distinct things that I want to do in each of those states. So let's create another state macro. So I'm in my macros folder, right click, create, bolt, state macro. I'm going to call this game logic. I'm going to edit the graph, go into full screen. I am going to create a flow state. I'm going to actually leave this called start. I'm going to create another flow state called gameplay. I am going to create another flow state called loss. And I'm going to create another flow state called victory. I'm going to have a transition from start to gameplay. So click on start, right click, make transition to gameplay. And I'm going to have transitions from gameplay to both victory and loss. So right click, make transition to victory, and right click, make transition to loss. Now from here, I can set things up to transition how I want them to work out. Now, why am I doing this start going into gameplay? That's going to be for the bonus video. I just want to go ahead and have this set up. It is not uncommon in a game logic scenario of having some stuff that I want to do pre the game running. So before I handle anything else, before I really let the game get started, I might want to do something here. Maybe I want to display some sort of a cutscene or dialogue or play some voice lines, start some background music, etc. Things that I only want to do in this start state and that I don't want to redo ever as I am playing the game. Maybe I've got some initialization that I want to run here on values. A whole bunch of reasons as to why I might need this. Now, in this video, I'm not going to use it. I just wanted to put it there to sort of put the bug in your ear of, this is a useful thing to have. So for this transition, that's an easy one. I am just simply going to grab the update event out of lifecycle and just immediately trigger the state transition. That's it. Effectively, as soon as a single update loop runs, I will transition out of start and into gameplay. Now, what do I do in gameplay? Nothing, really. All my logic is elsewhere. There's no real logic for me to do here. If I was going to be displaying something like timers or keeping track of UI like score or stuff like that, lives lost, etc., I might have some additional logic in here. But as it stands, there's nothing I really need to do. What I do need to know is, have I touched the chicken or have I been touched by the enemy? And to really do that, I'm going to have to go create some additional tags and put some stuff up on the chicken. I'll leave full screen, go back to my ascene view here, get out of 2D mode, and zoom back in on my scene so I can see things properly. So let's deal with the tags first. So I'm going to open up my project settings window, which I generally have open anyways. And I'm going to go to tags and layers. There's two tags that I want. I want one tag for my detector trigger, and I want a tag for the chicken trigger that I'm going to create. So I am going to create a tag called detect, and I'm going to create a tag called goal. So I've created two tags, detect and goal. I'm going to go to the detect game object that's on my enemy, and I'm going to tag it as detect. And then I'm going to go to my chicken, which I am going to rename as goal. And I'm also going to tag it as goal. Remember, object name has no relevance whatsoever on the tag. So now, oh, and there's one last thing I got to do for my chicken. There's no actual trigger on the chicken. No collision volume. And I don't need to put a rigid body on here because I don't plan on having the chicken ever move. So what I will do is I will add a sphere collider onto the chicken. I'll make sure I mark it as a trigger. I'll come over here and, you know what, radius of 0.75, I think. So that way I don't have to get like right on top of the chicken to pick it up. Once I get reasonably close to the chicken, it'll get picked up. Could use a box collider. I just use the sphere because I think that just makes a little bit more shape matching sense for the chicken. With that, I am ready to go back into my graphs here and set up, no, that is the enemy, not game logic. Set up my transitions into victory and loss. And that's going to be fairly simple. In that, so I double-clicked. Sorry, forgot to narrate that. So I'm going to double-click on the transition to go into the flow graph, and I'm going to get this set up. And oops. As much as I tried to do these things in one single cut, in this particular case, real life decided to intrude itself most horrendously upon my video, so hence the reason for this cut here. Nothing's been done during the cut, so let's get rid of the cat and get back to the discussion at hand, which is setting up our victory conditions. So I am in the transition here, going from gameplay to victory. And what I want to ask is every frame. So I will be using update again out of lifecycle. Every frame I am going to ask the question, no, not every frame. I am thinking of something completely different. The question that I need to ask is an on-trigger enter. Just took a moment for my mind to catch up and remember where exactly I was in the project. Like I said, it's been a couple of hours for me, relatively speaking. What I want instead is that's the question, anytime that I enter a trigger, which trigger have I entered? So I've entered a trigger, and I am going to compare tags. So I'm going to do a compare tag. I am comparing the tag of the trigger that I just entered. And in this case, the tag that I am looking for is goal, because that is the tag that I placed on the chicken. And if indeed it is the goal tag, of course I will need a branch for this. If this is true, then I will trigger the transition. So I'm entering a trigger, comparing the tag, branching, trigger. And actually this logic will be exactly the same for the other one, except that I'll be looking at a different tag. Now what happens when I transition over to victory? Well, there's a couple of things that need to happen. When I enter the state, and I'm actually not going to use update or exit, because there's nothing here that I want to do every frame, and I won't be leaving this state. What I'm going to do is first I'm going to set the scene variable. Now, because I'm feeling lazy and I don't want to... oh, right, I don't think I've attached this to anything yet, so I can't be too lazy about it. Oh, well. So I need to get... no, not set. I need to get... or yes, I need to set. Again, I apologize for the slight scatteredness, but it's just taking my mind a moment to resync back into the flow of the project here. So I need to set a scene variable. And of course, it is game running. And actually, I'm just going to double check that real quick. Yes, game running. So I'm going to set the game running variable to false. So literal bool value unchecked means false. That's going to disable my player. That's going to disable all of my enemies. Next is I want to activate the victory game object. So I'm going to do a game object dot set active. What I am going to set active is the victory UI, which sadly we can't, well, we can sort of drag it in. We can drag it in, but notice if I dragged it in like this, it's dragging it in as an object variable, which is not correct. I do have to change that to scene. Or you can not be lazy and actually type in victory UI here. And that's it. That's all the logic we do on winning. We're going to set game running to false, and we're going to turn on our UI saying, yay, you win. And that should be testable functional code. So let's see if it works. Rotate over, run over the chicken, and nothing happens. So now we need to try to figure out why is nothing happening. And of course, as has been the case many times in this particular video sequence, you know exactly why it's not working. I got too excited about testing my code and I didn't actually add the state machine in. So yeah, that's a common problem. You would think that as often as I do this, I would have figured out to not do it by now. So I'm going to add in a state machine, and I'm going to hook up Come on, get down there. My game logic macro to it. Now it should work. Yep. And I know exactly what this is causing here. So it's working, mostly. I did run into an error when I slammed into the chicken. Now, I'm actually a bit glad that I made this error because it gives me a chance to show debugging, because error messages are distinctly non-useful when it comes to Bolt. This doesn't tell me anywhere in this which graph is actually causing the error. Now, I can take a reasonable guess, because the chicken doesn't have any logic, but the player does. And given that I was just working with the state machine, I know it's got to be in there. This is also another reason why we always test in small units, because I know where I've been changing code, so I've got at least a reasonable idea of where my error is. So I am going to move this down here, and it just happens to be here, showing me, it's like this is where the error is. It's on the victory. But I want to just go ahead and see when this happens. So I've got my player selected. I have my state machine in the graph. I'm going to hit the run button. I should see it immediately pulse from start to gameplay, which, well, I didn't actually see the pulse, but it transitioned over immediately, which is what I expect. I should see a pulse down to here. I do. And double click on victory to go into it. And what is it saying? Game object set active. And it's complaining about cannot convert Unity engine.gameObject to system.bool. The wires in Bolt will sometimes allow you to make connections that don't make sense. That's not where I meant to put you. And in this particular case, that's what happened. I connected this Boolean, or I connected this game object to the Boolean value instead of the target. I am activating the Victory UI to true. So I'm setting active on Victory UI to true. So that was the mistake. So you do have to be aware of that. Bolt will let you put wires in the wrong spot. Now I can go back and test it again. You found the chicken and won. And I can immediately see that there is a bit of an error here in that I'm not leaving the run state. And that does have to do with the way the character controllers are set up. If I go into my player move, look at the flow graph. Let's switch to full screen so we can see things easier. So we are immediately branching on game running true or false before we get into anything else. But it's not until the very end of this chain that we're setting our float value. So in order to make sure that I'm not endlessly running, I am going to add on to this false chain here an animator.setFloat vertical 0. That way, if the game isn't running, I will, every frame, but it doesn't matter, be setting my animator float value to 0. Test it again. There we go. Left the run animation. You found the chicken and won. Excellent. Victory is assured. And I can also just double check by switching to scene and looking at my guy over here, and the enemy has stopped rotating as the enemy is supposed to. All right, now let's get game over, which is if I enter in this cube that is tagged as detect. So I'm going to go into game logic. Now, the logic for these two transitions is identical. I'm entering a trigger, I'm comparing the tag of the trigger that I just entered, and if it is a specific tag, I am branching on the true to transition. So I'm just going to grab all of this, Control C, go back up, go into the transition to loss, click in the, because sometimes if, I'm going to click in the area, because sometimes if you don't click, Control V paste won't work. Get rid of my extra state transition. And I want to be looking for the detect tag. Always be careful when doing copy and paste that you are changing the elements that you in fact need to change. Copy and paste is at both times your best friend and your worst enemy. You must treat it with respect. And then the logic, didn't actually mean to get out full screen. The logic is actually going to be pretty much the same on loss as it is in victory. So again, I'm just going to grab all of this logic, copy it, go into loss, delete out all of that, paste this in, and instead of displaying the victory UI, I am going to display the loss UI. Let's test it. Oh, right, and remember that I can't leave this in full screen mode. Okay, so it works, but as you can see, there is a slight issue. I don't immediately stop moving on the AI here. It's still going to pursue to its current target. I don't want it to do that. I want it to stop immediately if the player runs into it. So we need to fix that. So I'm going to go into the enemy AI. And when I enter the end game state here, which we currently don't have any logic, I can set some logic up here. On the on enter state, I am going to reset my path. So I just started typing in reset path, and that will give me the nav mesh agent.reset path. When you reset the path, that clears the current path and basically stops the AI from moving. So let's test it. Run over. All right, that seems to have worked. Let me hit it on the extreme outer limits of detection here and test it that way. Yep. Still slides a little bit, but it works well enough for our purposes. Now we have all of the individual components ready. Next is to actually construct a level, and that is what the next video is going to be on. As always, if you learned something in this video, thumbs up would be appreciated. And if you didn't really learn much of anything, well, the thumbs down button is right next to it. Until next time.